I still remember the exact moment my father looked me in the eyes and decided my future with a single sentence. "You'll always be a failure, Ethan." The room fell silent. Every relative sitting around the dinner table stopped eating. My mother lowered her eyes and focused on her plate. My older brother leaned back in his chair with a small smile, like he'd been waiting his whole life to hear those words. No one defended me, not one person. I stood there holding a small gift I'd bought for my father's birthday. It wasn't expensive. In fact, it was all I could afford after months of struggling to keep my tiny repair shop alive. I'd worked extra hours just to buy something that might make him smile. Instead, he pushed the gift across the table without even opening it. "So this is all you could bring?" he asked. A few relatives exchanged awkward looks. Someone quietly laughed. My face burned with embarrassment. "I did my best," I said softly. "My best," my father repeated with a cold laugh. "That's your problem, Ethan. Your best has never been enough." Those words hit harder than I wanted to admit. For years, I'd convinced myself that if I worked harder, stayed humble, and never gave up, one day my family would finally be proud of me. But standing there, surrounded by people who shared my last name, I realized something painful. They had already decided who I was. Not a son, not a brother, just the family failure. My older brother raised his glass with a confident grin. "Come on, Dad," he joked. "Don't be too hard on him. At least he keeps reminding us what happens when you don't know how to succeed." The table erupted in laughter. Every laugh felt like another door closing behind me. I looked at my mother, hoping, just hoping, she would say something, anything. But she stayed silent. That silence hurt more than every insult. I slowly placed the untouched gift on the table. "I think I should go," I whispered. My father didn't stop me. He didn't even look at me. As I reached the front door, his voice echoed through the house one last time. "Maybe next time you come back, you'll finally have something to be proud of." More laughter followed. I opened the door and stepped into the cold night. The air was freezing, but somehow it felt warmer than the room I'd just left. I reached into my pocket. $23. That was everything I had. No savings, no home, no plan. Just $23. And a heart that felt completely broken. As I walked away from the only family I'd ever known, I made a promise to myself. I would never beg them for respect again. If they wanted to believe I was a failure, I'd let them, because sometimes the loudest victories are built in complete silence. What I didn't know that night was that the same people who laughed as I walked away would one day stand in front of me, speechless, after discovering who I had really become. People always say that a family should be the first place where you feel loved. For me, it was the first place where I learned what it felt like to never be enough, as far back as I can remember. My older brother, Ryan, was the pride of the Carter family. He was smart, confident, good at sports. Teachers praised him. Neighbors admired him. My father couldn't stop talking about him. Whenever guests came over, he would proudly point at Ryan's trophies lined up on the living room shelf. "That's my son," he'd say with a smile that seemed impossible to earn. Then his eyes would drift toward me. "And this is Ethan," nothing more. No smile, no pride. Just my name. At first, I didn't understand the difference. I was only 7 years old. I thought maybe if I studied harder, if I behaved better, if I helped around the house, one day my father would smile at me the same way. So I tried every single day. While Ryan spent weekends playing soccer with friends, I mowed the lawn, washed the family car, cleaned the garage, and helped my mother carry groceries. I never complained. I believed hard work would eventually earn love, but every time I finished a chore, my father barely looked up. "Good," he'd say, then he'd turn to Ryan. "So, son, how was practice today?" It was always about Ryan. Always. When I was 10 years old, I entered my school's science fair. For weeks, I stayed awake late at night, building a small wind-powered generator using old bicycle parts and pieces I found in our garage. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. When the judges announced first place, they called my name. For the first time in my life, I felt truly proud. I held the trophy so tightly that my hands hurt. All I wanted was to show my family. I ran home as fast as I could. "Dad!" I shouted as I opened the front door. "I won!" He looked up from the television for only a second. "What did you win?" "The science fair." He nodded without much interest. "That's nice." Then he turned back to the game. That was it. 2 words, "That's nice." A few minutes later, Ryan walked through the door wearing a silver medal from a local soccer tournament. My father stood up immediately. He shook Ryan's hand, called my mother into the room, even took pictures. Watching that scene felt like someone quietly erased my own victory. That night, I placed my science trophy on the shelf beside Ryan's awards. The next morning, it was gone. I searched everywhere until I found it inside a cardboard box in the garage, covered in dust. I never asked who moved it deep down. I already knew as the years passed, the comparisons only became worse. If Ryan can do it, why can't you? Why can't you be more confident? Why don't teachers ever talk about you? Your brother makes us proud. Each sentence chipped away at my confidence. Eventually, I stopped trying to compete with Ryan, not because I wasn't capable, because I knew I'd already lost a competition I was never allowed to win. The only person who ever showed me kindness was my grandfather. He was quiet, patient, and wiser than anyone I had ever met. Whenever things became too painful at home, I'd sit with him on the old wooden porch behind his small farmhouse. He never asked why I looked sad. Somehow, he already knew. One evening, when I was 16, he handed me a worn leather notebook. Inside were pages filled with business ideas, sketches, and handwritten notes from the small repair shop he had owned when he was younger. He smiled and said, "People who aren't appreciated at home often build something extraordinary somewhere else." I looked at him, confused. "But Grandpa, what if they're right about me?" He gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "They're judging the seed before it has a chance to grow." Those words stayed with me. Years later, they would become the reason I refused to give up. When I graduated from high school, Ryan received a brand new car from my parents as a reward for getting into a prestigious university. I didn't expect the same gift. I wasn't jealous. I just hoped for a simple congratulations. Instead, my father handed me a folded envelope. Inside was a list of local warehouses that were hiring. He looked me straight in the eye. "It's time you stopped dreaming and started accepting reality." Reality, I hated that word, because to my father, reality meant giving up before I'd even begun. So I took the warehouse job during the day. At night, I taught myself how to repair electronics, restore old equipment, and understand how businesses worked. Every paycheck, I saved a little, every mistake. I treated like a lesson. No one noticed. No one asked what I was working toward. To them, I was still the quiet son who would never amount to anything. Maybe that was for the best, because while they were busy deciding who I could never become, I was slowly becoming someone they would never expect. And although I didn't know it then, the day was coming when the same family that dismissed me as a failure would be forced to say my name with something they'd never shown me before. Respect. By the time I turned 26, I finally believed my life was changing. After years of working double shifts at the warehouse and spending every evening repairing broken electronics in my tiny apartment, I had saved enough money to open a small repair shop. It wasn't much. The paint on the walls was peeling. The sign outside was old and faded. Most of my tools were secondhand. But when I unlocked that door for the first time, it felt like I was unlocking a new future. For the first few months, business was slow. Some days, I didn't have a single customer. Other days, I made just enough to pay the bills. Still, I never gave up. I believed that if I kept working hard, people would eventually notice. Then everything changed. A large electronics chain opened only 2 blocks away. They offered lower prices, faster service, and flashy advertisements I could never afford. Within weeks, My customers disappeared. The rent became impossible to pay. Bills piled up on my desk. I sold my spare tools just to keep the lights on. Every morning, I unlocked the shop hoping for a miracle. Every evening, I locked it again with more fear than the day before. The miracle never came. One rainy afternoon, my landlord walked in with a folder in his hands. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said quietly. "I can't wait any longer." I nodded before he even finished speaking. I already knew. That evening, I locked the shop for the last time. As I turned the key, I rested my hand on the door for a moment. Years of sacrifice, gone. I loaded my remaining tools into the trunk of my old car and drove away without looking back. I thought about calling my family. Maybe, just maybe, this time they would understand. When I arrived at my parents' house, my father listened in silence as I explained what had happened. When I finished, he folded his arms. "I warned you," he said. "Dreams don't pay bills." "I wasn't asking for money," I replied. "I just needed someone to believe in me." He shook his head. "Belief is earned, Ethan, and you've done nothing but prove us right." Ryan smirked from across the room but didn't say a word. That hurt even more. I looked at my mother, hoping she'd say something. Anything. She simply lowered her eyes. The silence told me everything. I walked out of the house with my last box of tools in my hands. That night, I slept in my car outside an old parking lot. The rain tapped against the windshield while I stared at the ceiling, wondering how life had fallen apart so quickly. For the first time in years, I almost gave up, but deep inside, I remembered my grandfather's words. "They're judging the seed before it has a chance to grow." As I closed my eyes, I made one final promise to myself. If life gave me one more chance, I wouldn't waste it, and that chance would come from the last place I ever expected. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff back and an empty stomach. My phone battery had died during the night, and the little cash I had left could barely buy a cup of coffee. I sat in my car for a long time, asking myself the same question over and over. What now? For the first time in my life, I had no answer. I spent the next few days driving around town, looking for work. Every place I visited either wasn't hiring or wanted experience I didn't have. Each rejection felt heavier than the last. One afternoon, while walking through a quiet neighborhood, I noticed an elderly man standing outside a small repair shop. He was struggling to lift a heavy toolbox into his truck. Without thinking, I walked over. "Need a hand?" I asked. He smiled. "I'd appreciate that." After we loaded the toolbox, he looked at me for a moment. "You've done this kind of work before, haven't you?" I nodded. "I used to own a repair shop." "Used to?" he asked. It didn't survive. Instead of giving me the usual look of pity, he simply said, "Failure doesn't scare me. People who quit do." His words caught me off guard. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, the owner of a small electronics workshop that had been in business for over 30 years. Before I left, he asked a question no one had ever asked me. "Can you start tomorrow?" I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard correctly. You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," he replied. "The rest is up to you." That simple sentence changed everything. Over the next few months, Mr. Harrison became more than a boss. He became the mentor I had always needed. He taught me that fixing machines was easy. Understanding people was the real skill. "Customers don't come back because you repair their devices," he often said. "They come back because you make them feel they can trust you." Every evening after closing, we'd sit together in the workshop, talking about business, mistakes, and second chances. One night he looked at me and said, "Ethan, stop thinking like a man trying to survive. Start thinking like a man who's building something that will outlive him." Those words stayed with me. For the first time, someone wasn't judging me by my past. They were believing in my future. And as I locked up the workshop that night, I had a feeling my life was finally beginning to change. I had lost everything, but maybe losing everything was exactly what I needed to find the person I was always meant to become. Working with Mr. Harrison changed more than my career. It changed the way I saw myself. For years I had believed my family was right, that I simply wasn't good enough. But every day in that small workshop proved otherwise. Customers started asking for me by name. They trusted my advice. Some even drove across town because they wanted me to fix their devices. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being compared to anyone. I was simply being Ethan. After almost 2 years of working side by side, Mr. Harrison called me into his office one evening. He placed a small set of keys on the desk. "I've been thinking about retiring," he said with a gentle smile, "and I don't want this shop to disappear." I looked at him in surprise. "I want you to take over." I was speechless. "I don't have enough money to buy it," I admitted. He shook his head. "I'm not asking for all the money today. Pay me little by little. What matters to me isn't the price of the shop. It's knowings it's in the right hands. No one had ever trusted me like that before. I accepted without hesitation. From that day forward, I treated the business as if my life depended on it. Because it did. I arrived before sunrise and often left long after dark. I repaired devices, trained new employees, answered customer calls, and learned everything I could about running a successful business. Every dollar I earned went back into improving the shop. Slowly, the business grew. Then it grew again. Within 3 years, we opened a second location. A year later, a third. People began recognizing our company across the state, but very few knew who owned it. I preferred it that way. While my family believed I was still struggling to make ends meet, I quietly built a future they couldn't imagine. Sometimes I drove past my parents' house after work. The lights were always on. Their lives hadn't changed, neither had their opinion of me. I could have stopped the car, knocked on the door, and told them the truth. I could have shown them everything I had achieved, but I didn't. Not because I wanted revenge, because I no longer needed their approval. Success had given me something far more valuable than money. It had given me peace. Little did I know, fate was already arranging the moment when the truth would reach them on its own. And when it did, the silence I had lived with for years would finally speak louder than every insult they had ever thrown at me. It had been almost 7 years since I walked out of my parents' house, with nothing but a broken heart and $23 in my pocket. In all that time, no one from my family had called to ask how I was doing. No birthday messages, no holiday invitations, nothing. I had learned to live without expecting anything from them. Then, one quiet Monday morning, something unexpected arrived. A plain white envelope. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat. The Carter family. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Part of me wanted to throw it away without opening it. Another part, the younger version of me who had spent years chasing my family's approval, wanted to know what it said. I slowly unfolded the letter. "Ethan, your mother is turning 60 this Saturday. The whole family will be there. We hope you'll join us." No apology, no explanation, just an invitation. I read it twice before placing it on my desk. It felt strange. After years of silence, why now? That evening, I showed the letter to Mr. Harrison. He adjusted his glasses and smiled. "So, are you going?" "I don't know," I admitted. "The last time I saw them, they made it clear I didn't belong." He leaned back in his chair. "Then don't go to prove anything." I looked at him. "Go because you've already proven everything to yourself." His words stayed with me all night. He was right. I wasn't the same man who had left that house years ago. Back then, I had walked away carrying disappointment. Now I carried confidence. The next morning, I made my decision. I would go, not to seek acceptance, not to show off my success, but to finally close a chapter that had haunted me for years. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I parked my car a few houses away and stood outside my childhood home. Everything looked the same. The old oak tree in the front yard, the porch where I used to wait for my father to come home from work, the windows that had watched me leave on the worst night of my life. I took a slow, deep breath. For a brief moment, I wondered if walking through that front door was a mistake. Then I remembered the promise I had made to myself years ago. I wasn't returning as the broken man they had laughed at. I was returning as the man I had fought to become. I straightened my jacket, walked toward the front door, and rang the bell. What waited for me on the other side would change my family's lives forever. The front door opened, and for a brief second, my mother simply stared at me, her eyes widened with surprise. "Ethan, you actually came," I gave her a small smile. "Happy birthday, Mom." She stepped aside, and I walked into the house I hadn't entered in 7 years. Nothing had changed. The same family photos still covered the walls. The same dining table stood in the center of the room. The only difference was me. The conversation stopped as relatives noticed my arrival. Some greeted me politely, others whispered to each other. Then my father looked up from across the room. "So, you're still around," he said with a faint smirk. "I am," I replied calmly. Ryan walked over, wearing an expensive suit and the same confident smile I remembered. "I heard you've been doing repair work," he said. "At least you found something you're good at." A few relatives chuckled. Years ago, those words would have crushed me. This time, they didn't. I simply smiled and took a seat. A few minutes later, my uncle stood up and raised his glass. "I have some exciting news," he announced. "Our construction company is about to sign the biggest business partnership in its history." Everyone applauded. "They're sending their CEO here tonight to finalize the agreement," he continued proudly. "If this deal goes through, it will change everything for our family." The room buzzed with excitement. Everyone wanted to meet the mysterious businessman. Everyone. Except me, because I already knew exactly who they were waiting for. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. The room fell silent. My uncle hurried to answer the door. A moment later, he walked back inside with my company's senior executive beside him. He looked around the room until his eyes found mine. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward me. Every conversation stopped. The room became completely silent. He smiled warmly and extended his hand. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," he said respectfully. "Everyone is waiting for you. The contracts are ready whenever you are." No one moved. No one spoke. My father's smile disappeared. Ryan's face turned pale. My uncle looked back and forth between us, completely confused. What do you mean?" he asked. The executive answered before I could. "Mr. Ethan Carter is the founder and owner of Carter Tech Solutions. We don't sign any major partnership without his approval." It felt as if time had stopped. The same family who had spent years calling me a failure now stared at me in complete disbelief. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, the room was silent because of me. The silence in the room lasted longer than anyone expected. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered. The people who had spent years judging me now couldn't even look me in the eyes. My father slowly lowered himself into his chair, his face pale with shock. I didn't know," he said quietly. For the first time in my life, his voice carried no anger, only regret. Ryan looked at me, searching for the right words. "I guess I was wrong about you." I smiled gently. "It wasn't your job to believe in me, Ryan," I said. "But it was never your place to tell me what I could become." He lowered his head. Even my uncle, who had been so excited about the business deal, looked embarrassed. "I had no idea you built all of this," he admitted. "I built it because I had to," I replied. "Not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong." My mother walked toward me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered. "I should have stood beside you. I should have spoken when you needed me the most." For a moment, I saw the guilt she had carried for years. I gently took her hand. "We can't change the past, Mom, but we can decide what we do from today." She nodded, unable to hold back her tears. Then I turned to my father. "I spent years hoping you'd finally be proud of me," I said calmly. But somewhere along the way, I realized something. The room grew quiet once again. I don't need anyone's permission to believe in myself." My father looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I wish I had understood that sooner," he said. I smiled, not with pride, but with peace. "Success was never my revenge," I said. "It was my freedom." I shook hands with my company's executive, signed the partnership papers, and wished my mother a happy birthday one last time. As I walked toward the front door, no one tried to stop me. This time, I wasn't leaving with $23 and a broken heart. I was leaving with something far more valuable, self-respect, and I finally understood the greatest lesson of my journey. The best way to answer those who doubt you isn't with anger or revenge. It's by becoming the person they never believed you could be.